Hey everybody, this is Perch, and this is kind of half comic review, half, I'm not sure what it is, but we're talking about basically this Phoenix book here that is starring Echo. So this is Phoenix Song Echo #1. This is I want to say a 5-part series, I think. At any rate, this comic, so I'm not in the habit of doing reviews for comics I don't like. I don't like this comic, but this isn't a video review about how bad the comic is or dunking on the comic. I mean, I'm sure other people will do that or have done that. But, I generally prescribe to this idea and I hold to it. If you don't like something, just don't harp on it. But what I want to talk about in this book is there's a number of errors, I think, or places in this book that could have been very easily solved had editorial come in and made some suggestions or some edits, or I mean, there's issues in this book. There's some dialogue here that's just kind of tough is probably the best way to put it. Again, I don't want to do a blow by blow this comic. Other will, but there's some errors, and this is what I want to point out here about where clearly an editor was needed to kind of step in and go, hey, this is completely off with what we know about the character, or hey, what you're doing on this page is immediately contradicted on the very next page. And I think I'm not saying, oh, all the problems in this comic are blamed on the editor. No, there's some definite painful writing and other parts of the story for sure. But my question is, why isn't somebody stepping in and helping more here? And Echo, so let me back up a moment. First of all, Echo as a character was created more than 20 years ago, back in Daredevil. Many people think Brian Michael Bendis created the character. That is incorrect. It's actually David Mack, and Joe Quesada actually was the artist when she first appeared. This was back in Daredevil #9, December 1999. And then she later, about 6 years later, appeared as Ronin in New Adventures. That was written by Bendis. And then Bendis did more with her. I think she showed up in the Pulse, and there's a couple other things they did with Echo. But David Mack deserves a credit for creating the character. I don't know why that's been memory hold for some people. Maya Lopez is the name. She is a Native American. Her father, Willie Crazy Horse Lincoln, was killed by the Kingpin, and Crazy Horse dies, leaving a bloody handprint on Maya's face and a last dying wish that Kingpin raise Maya well. Kingpin honors the dying wish, caring for her as her own daughter. She spent to an expensive school with people for learning disabilities, but she was basically death was ultimately kind of what was going on there. And then she's sent to infiltrate Matt Murdock and everything else. And then they fall in love, but she takes on the Echo guys. She paints the white handprint on her face, so it's painted, not a weird scar or something like. I think that may have been retconned, by the way. At some point, I'm not sure, or either that or they're kind of forgotten about the fact that it was originally intended to be painted. But anyway, so it was a cool little, it was a new idea. It was a new character, very different, had an interesting, even though the origins were like other things that's been done in Daredevil before, there were some interesting parts to it. When Bendis used her for the Avengers, she kind of like was she was under the guise of Ronin, and there was a little bit of, shenanigans with Secret Invasion that was going on. And then, she showed up in Moon Knight. She basically was somebody you guest starred to bring her in, but nobody really did too much with her until recently. Jason Aaron had Echo get chosen as the new Phoenix Force, and that's where this comic comes in. That's where she is. But the character is deaf, something that seems to, well, anyway, again, we'll get to that. So the Phoenix Force now draws the handprint on her face with fire. It's a gold handprint now, I guess. I don't. It's not burning, but it's gold for some reason. So okay. So when we get to this comic, this is by Rebecca Roanhorse, and the art is by Luca Marquesa, and the art is fine. I think it's definitely serviceable. I think I have my complaint with the art, which is a complaint of a lot of art these days, which is at times the backgrounds get really skimmed, and so I'm almost wondering if Marvel should start to adopt a manga-like approach to the art, where you have a team and people who, somebody might do, the backgrounds for all the pages and somebody focus on the foregrounds. I mean, I don't love that idea, but, when I look at this comic, which seems to come and go with backgrounds. There you have it. Rebecca Roanhorse doesn't have a lot of comic credits to her name. And I think part of the idea here was we need a Native American to write a book about a Native American. Okay, fine. But therein lies a bit of the trap, because we get this comic and basically the best way to sum it up is that Echo is trying to control the Phoenix Force. It's slowly consuming her. She's having violent impulses, just straight up murders a guy by burning his face off a couple pages in, and then almost tortures some kids. The kids are saved, and so, we this burning building in this comic, she escapes it, and she sits there for a while in the flames, and there's a thought dialogue stuff going on. It says, and this is where kind of, again, editorial coming in would be, very helpful, because they write these kind of this inner dialogue as, I was just trying to help. This is a disaster. I've got to find some way to control this new power. I want to do good, but the Phoenix Force is an all-powerful cosmic entity, almost a god. It doesn't know the meaning of restraint. What kind of Avenger burns a man to death? Is that who I am now? And then on the same page, actually, Elektra shows up, who's in her Daredevil guise. And Elektra is unnecessarily kind of bitchy here and talkative, which, I mean, neither really fits Elektra, but Elektra goes slinking away, I see. And Phoenix, again, thoughts immediately go to, it's like I can smell her arrogance. We just got several scenes where she's horrified by the fact that she almost killed, a child, and really kind of screwed up a building, burned some guy to death. And then she immediately takes a bitchy tone where the two have a little, spar of, waving it off. It was an accident. It conflicts with the page immediately before it. And again, this is where I say, this is where an editor would come in and go, you set this all up wrong. The dynamic is off. The characters are not talking like themselves. Elektra kind of says, you're a murderer. That's a little bit rich for Elektra, but I mean, I'm just, does that fit her character either? Fine. But it immediately kind of goes to, she rages up and then runs off. Elektra says, don't tell me you're running away again. And basically Daredevil's like, hey, maybe Hell's Kitchen isn't the place for you, says Elektra, Daredevil. Maybe Hell's Kitchen isn't the place for you anymore, Goldie. There's a whole wide world out there. Go find somewhere else to burn to ashes. And then a page and a half later, Echo basically agrees. I'm sorry, maybe you're right. I don't belong here. Elektra then screams after her, don't tell me you're running away again. Lady, you just suggested this 2 pages ago. And this immediately heads to a scene where basically she flies around. She flies up to the moon and kind of hangs out there. For whatever reason, the moon has full gravity because she's like put her phone on the moon ground, which then gets a video call. So it's got this is definitely not an AT&T customer. But anyway, all that logic aside, she gets a call from Brew saying, hey, you should go check something out. So she's like, all right, I'll do it. Why is Brew sending her information? Because he's kind of, in theory, aligned to the Avengers, but is she exactly? Nobody knows what's going on here, but she basically flies to a deserted island, meets up with Forge. Forge is, she recognizes him, an X-Men from the likes of it. But then as it gets a little further into this, Forge is a Native American. They don't bother to kind of comment on that. Was that a strategy that they wanted a Native American to talk to a Native American? Who knows in the comic. Later in the comic, we get to more of that, but they don't mention any of this during the dialogue, which Forge is basically saying, you might not understand the power you're packing, but I do. You carry within you one of the most powerful forces in the universe, capable of great destruction. The Phoenix Force is not to be trifled with. To which she responds, is he mansplaining me? What? Again, it's clunky dialogue, but more importantly, it doesn't fit at all what's going on in the comic. When Forge says, I'm here to save you, and she goes, I've never needed saving less in my life. Yeah, except lady, 2 pages ago, you were sitting up on the moon saying, I'm too dangerous to be around people now. I don't belong up on Earth or even in space or even out there among the stars. So she's having these doubts saying, I don't belong here anywhere. And then she says, I've never needed saving less in my life. What are you doing? So anyway, they go back and forth, and Ford says you need to give up the power. He restrains her, but it doesn't work. And, she basically gets angry and flies off and heads to the res. Now, I'll also point out that the res is, that's a loaded term. Definitely Native Americans use it at different parts. You go to the Navajo Nation, they will call it the res. But it's also, it's odd to see it rolled out here. So she then goes, I need a teacher. I need a place I'll feel safe. I need to go home. I need to go to a place for tribes, place for people. Again, lady, you just left a Native American, one of the few ones in comics, which isn't described. But then you go to the reservation to chat with a chief, and so they go back and forth. But again, the dialogue is bouncing around page to page of her being simultaneously like, oh, I'm murdering people. That's not good. Things are bad, to defiant and angry. Why is everybody after me? Why does everybody think I don't need any help? Nobody needs to help me. And it's just, it fluctuates between, I'm about to murder a bunch of people, to, I am angry. Why are people treating me this way? To, oh no, I'm scared that I'm getting out of control. If the goal was to show a kind of torn apart person who is got these powers, but it's changing her and it's causing her to react in different ways, that's not altogether wrong. It doesn't come across that way. It just comes across that way as goofy. And once again, this is where an editor might come in and say, hey, the story you're trying to tell of somebody in a lot of conflict, somebody who's trying to move things around, let alone the fact that none of the dialogue and none of what we're talking about relates to any of Echo's backstory. Even though the entire crux of the comic is about the fact that there's this threat coming. It's the adversary from the Fall of Mutants series, from that event years and years ago. Even though the comic is about the adversary getting into her whole ancestral line and threatening her family, we don't really get into the core crux of her origin from the very beginning, which is very much rooted in her family. This doesn't read like the writer read those original Daredevil stories. Now, granted, Echo is not the most fleshed out person or character in the Marvel Universe, which makes it maybe all the more infuriating that very simple things could have been done to root this comic up better. And the point of this comic is to raise Echo into greater prominence, to, basically, the Echo's going to be in this Hawkeye series starting in a couple weeks on Disney+. And then, in theory, they're talking about how she may do a spin-off series as well. They said a spin-off series starring Echo was in early development in March of 2021. So there's been word that we're going to get an actual Echo series from Disney Plus at some point. So that's why Marvel's trying to gain more prominence. Now, Marvel's doing that in a very bizarre way, unless this comic ends with her giving up the Phoenix Force, because definitely the Echo that we're getting in and on the Disney Plus series is not going to be flying around with the Phoenix Force. But it's a very haphazard, very goofy way to introduce a character. And again, I think this isn't to excuse some of the writing, because some of the writing in the dialogue is painful. There's a scene earlier where, she's reminding the reader that she's deaf. She says, I know you're here, Elektra. Come out where I can read your lips. Except we're also see that that the Phoenix Force is giving her some information and some, it's giving her greater power. So does the deafness even matter to her anymore? Is that even something that she's dealing with? Can she hear? Does she have celestial powers that are informing her? We don't know. That's part of the question. They remind us that she's deaf, but then other parts of the comic don't state that. She's walking and talking with Forge and not looking at him in several scenes in the book. So there's lots of moments here where you wouldn't ever know the character was deaf unless you read that first panel and kind of inferred it or knew about her history. So the writing is clunky, no doubt about it, in this comic. But I think this is a perfect illustration, if you read it, of a place where there was somebody's job. In this case, I guess Sarah Brunstad, the editor, or Tom Brevoort, the executive editor, who should have come in and said, hey, this is an important project for us because of, there's going to be a TV show. We're doing this limited series that's going to be collected. It's somebody who has the Phoenix Force or tied with Avengers and X-Men and all these kinds of things. It's a pretty key, pretty key comic for Marvel. So, we want this to sell. We want it to do right. And it's clunky is probably the best word for it. It's clunky. And I don't know. I question if you have an important project on this, why are you putting a more new green writer on it in the first place? If you want this to kind of stand out and be something that can kind of complement your efforts over at Disney, but I'm overthinking it, right? But this is a great example of a place where, with a couple suggestions, I don't know you'd have a great book or maybe even a good book, but there's some very avoidable problems, like the dialogue with Elektra, like some of the panels where it says one thing and then a page later does the exact opposite, something that a good editor could come in and say, hey, you need to shuffle this around here because it's creating a very clunky book. You could almost go through here and re-letter it and come up with a better story, or not better story, but a story that kind of feeds smarter. That I think this book, if you're interested in that kind of thing, I think it's a good illustration of that. So curious who read this, what you think. I know there's some people on my channel really looking forward to it, anxious to read it. So cool. I like Echo as a character, full disclosure. I think it's cool. I do like the idea of dipping into more Native American characters. I think it's an underserved aspect of comics in general. And I think there's some very cool characters you can do a lot with. But this book is clunky. And I think there were some very avoidable mistakes that were made. Anyway, let me know what you think. Maybe I'm being too hard on it. Probably am, I'm sure. As I said, there's undoubtedly there's some videos out there that rip this to shreds because there's aspects of it that definitely lend itself to that. You could do a pretty solid roast on this comic, but that's not the point. I do, I look at these things. I would like for these characters to come off well. I would like to have a comic that sells well. I'd like for the writer again and the artist, Luca Maresca. Luca Maresca does a very solid job. You could put this person on a book. I mean, again, it's not this isn't a master at work, but for somebody coming into comics, it's solid. It's something that you could grow here. So I'd like to see it have its best foot forward, and that's again, very simple things could have made a stronger comic, in my view. So let me know what you think. If you read it, what you think. And thanks for listening.